audio files from the stuff I've taught since like last year. That's my goal at some point.
Do SoundCloud. Don't use MP3s.
Okay.
I thought about stealing one of the pages on our church website to dedicate to the TascForce ministry. So, I don't know, I'm still kind of thinking about it. TascForce.com. Okay, tonight we're going to talk about love's power over envy. What is envy? If I was to ask you guys, how would you define envy? What would you say? Give me some definitions here.
Wanting something that somebody else has.
Wanting something someone else has, okay. What else?
Or desiring something that you are not meant to have.
Sure. What is a synonym for envy?
Jealous.
Jealousy. Jealousy. Yes, that's a synonym. The Greek word for envy is an interesting one. It comes from a root word meaning to boil. Picture a seething, boiling jealousy that grows within the heart of a man. That's us as people. The church of Corinth were torn apart by divisions and jealousies. When you go through and read the gifts and all that stuff, those chapters, you see that these guys were not getting along. People were coveting each other's everything. So it's a pretty bad situation. So Paul goes through and he writes the letter here, and in this section he's talking about the different characteristics of love. So he mentions that love does not envy. So that's what we're going to talk about for a little bit tonight. We use the word interchangeably for jealous. Though they are used often in the New Testament interchangeably, there's a subtle difference between the two words. I mean, we're not splitting hairs over, words tonight. If you want to say envy, that's fine. If you want to say jealous, that's fine. I mean, to me, they're all the same. Envy stands at the bottom of the pile, breathing ill will at everyone who is above it. Jealousy stands at the top of the pile, afraid that someone will replace it. Envy is angry at what everyone else has that it does not have. Jealousy is afraid that what it owns will be taken away by someone else. Envy begins with empty hands, mourning its lack, but joying when others lose their superiority. Jealousy begins with full hands, fearful of losing what it has already achieved to someone else. To be jealous or envious means to strike out at what somebody is or what somebody has. The Bible tells us that we are to rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. But jealousy turns that on its head and says, no, I'm going to weep when the person rejoices, and I'm going to rejoice when the person weeps. It's getting it backwards. When someone else has something that you want, you're upset. You're like, man, you get angry. And the other way is like when, somebody else is crying, you're like, yes, that's what I want. It's kind of a twisted way of life. Instead of rejoicing with those who rejoice, weeping with those who weep, it's the opposite. Rejoicing that somebody's weeping and weeping that somebody else is rejoicing. Jealousy, according to Shakespeare, is the green sickness. Have you guys ever heard of a phrase, green with envy? Green with envy. It makes you green. Jealousy is a very destructive thing. It destroys families, tears apart marriages. It tears apart churches, relationships between people. It's one vice that has brought more ill will to the kingdom of God than possibly with any other except for probably pride. Pride does a lot of damage as well. If you study envy and jealousy in the Bible, you will discover an interesting concept. Jealousy travels in circles. It travels in circles of possessions. Because you want something someone else has. Genesis 26:14. Isaac had possessions of flocks and possessions of herds and great numbers of servants. So the Philistines envied him. Jealousy travels most often in the circles of the affluent because they have more stuff that other people can see and want. If all you have is a rusty old, Ford Tempo like I used to have, nobody's going to be envious of your car. But if you have a brand new, Camaro or Mustang, people are going to be like, man, that's a nice car. I'd like to have a car like that. You're not envious of somebody who doesn't have anything that's nice, right?
But nobody will steal it, amen?
Nobody will steal it, amen?
Your moped at work.
Nobody will steal Ethan's moped at work. Jealousy and envy travel in power circles as well. In the Old Testament, there's a story about Miriam, Aaron, and Korah who envied Moses' leadership. You guys remember that story? They were like, well, why is he the chief? Why is God talking to him? Is he the only one that's a prophet? So they're like, getting in an uproar because they thought, well, we should get the same type of treatment. And it showed that they envied. Psalms 106:16 says they envied Moses in the camp. If you read the Old Testament books of Kings and Chronicles, you'll find out there's a king who gains a lot, and then he's usurped by another guy who wanted what he had. Then that guy gets usurped by another guy. I mean, it's just this long line of power struggle, envy, where people are getting murdered. And, when you go through and read the genealogy, or not the genealogies, but the time range of some of these people, it was like really short. It's like, oh, well, you're king. 3 weeks later, you're assassinated. Well, how does that work? It wasn't great. In the New Testament, we see examples of the Sanhedrin. You guys know who the Sanhedrin is? They were the 71 rulers of the Jewish people in the times of Christ in the book of Acts. They were the ones who made all the religious decisions.
The house of Lord.
Yeah, in Acts 5:17 and 18, it says, they were filled with indignation and laid their hands on the apostles and put them in the common prison. Why were they filled with indignation? People were getting a bigger following than they were. Everybody's going out to listen to them, and they're like, wow, these guys got the greatest message ever. They're getting a lot of converts and a big following. And they were like, no, that ain't going to work. So they grabbed them and, drug them off to jail and stuff. So that's a New Testament example of this. Jealousy travels in performing circles as well. Look at the story of David and Saul. You guys remember that story? David, young warrior guy, he was a shepherd. Liked to go sit in the pasture and play with his harp all day long. Yeah, he just sit there and twang, twang, twang. That was David. Gazing up at the stars. Feeling the bare feet or bare grass underneath his feet. But that's David. Goliath was the guy who was causing the trouble to the kingdom. David goes and beats Goliath. And the people of Israel began to sing a little song. It said, David has slain his 10,000s, while Saul has slain his thousands. The king didn't care for that very much. When you get this little runt guy who's nobody, and people are like falling in love with him more than the king, it doesn't sit very well.
Saul was pretty underhanded there. Like he was trying to get David to wear his armor, so it looks like he's Saul fighting Goliath. Don't you think the king shrunk a little bit?
That's very possible. So when the words came to Saul, how did he respond? Was he like, oh, this David's a great guy, he's going to be somebody big? How did Saul respond to all that stuff?
He tried to throw his spear.
Yeah, he's like, well, next he's going to have my kingdom, and he was plotting to murder him for like the rest of his life. I mean, that was probably quite a long time, too. So he was so mad about David and how David was, in defeating the giant, he wanted him dead. I think Saul needed some bipolar medication or something. Something there. One place where you find envy is in church. With music. There's a lot of stories about somebody, wanting to be the chief piano player. And then, we'll call Sue, our character here. Sue thinks she could be a better piano player than Mary Jo. Well, but Mary Jo gets the chief piano player, and they get really angry and, all that type of stuff. It happens.
Would you play the offertories? Mary Jo tragically had the piano covers snapped down on her fingers. Ooh, look how that happened.
And people are always thinking that they're the better performer and, they're the better singer, better musician. Church, music can cause envy. I don't know if, you guys are better musicians than me, obviously. Yeah, I can a little bit. I haven't touched it in about 4 years, though. I tuned it about 2 years ago, and that was the last time I've ever really messed with it. But, so it also travels in professional circles. When Paul was in prison in Rome, the Bible tells us in the book of Philippians that other preachers who were his contemporaries began to take advantage of his imprisonment, preaching out of envy and contention. So Paul had a choice. He could have been jealous of their jealousy, or he could have handled it, in a Christ-like way. So his response was that even if they're preaching for the wrong motive, I'm just glad somebody's preaching. You know, that was kind of his approach to it. Families have envy problems. Can you guys name a family in the Bible that had issues with envy?
Jacob's family.
Jacob's family. Who else? There's another one in the same book that I'm thinking of.
Jacob and Esau.
I'm thinking the very beginning.
But
Cain and Abel. Yeah. His brother, he was jealous of his brother's offering, so he slays him in the field.
Oh, I meant Joseph. Sorry.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing as Jacob's family. I mean, his kids.
Well, there was Jacob and Esau, and then there was Joseph.
Yeah. Jacob was definitely, or Joseph was the one that I'm thinking of. His brothers were envious of him because they gave him a coat of many colors. Kind of showed that he was his daddy's favorite. And when you got 11 other siblings, that don't sit very well. So what do? They throw him in a hole and sell him off to some Ishmaelite traders for, what was it, 20 shekels of silver? Or 30? I forget the number.
So, on the one hand...
It's like, well, let's not kill our brother. Let's just sell him into slavery. Like, that's a more humane thing to
Let's
do.
throw him down a well and then sell him into slavery.
Yeah.
And the other guys are fighting over.
Yeah, they're such nice guys there. You know, another New Testament example is the prodigal son. The older brother. Well, you never slayed a fatted calf for me. You know, and here's my drunken, whoremonger brother who's getting all of the celebration because he come home from his wasting his life, and he's getting all this stuff. Yep, that's the approach. That's the approach of envy. Not being happy for somebody else getting recognition, wanting it for yourself. When jealousy enters the front door, love leaves through the back. You know, watch what happens in a family. You know, I don't know if you guys ever see anything about like true crime shows and things like that. Every now and then I'll kind of watch something, on TV if I'm bored enough. About, let's say mom and dad, had this huge money and they die. They leave more money to one kid. It rips people apart. I mean, there's times when over death and inheritance, it'll completely rip a family apart because everybody wants every little thing that they can get. I mean, it will turn siblings against each other more than anything I've ever seen. Just that envy that one person's getting more than them. I mean, you got to watch out for that. If your sibling gets something you don't, be happy for them. I mean, rejoice with them. Don't be upset and don't think, walk off in a huff wanting to, strangle them with a wireless microphone. The message here is jealousy travels in circles. Have you ever been jealous of a professional wrestler?
No.
What about a plumber?
No.
What about the guy who runs the bank?
No.
The problem with jealousy that we're going to have is in the area where we live. It's going to be inside your family, it's going to be inside your church, it could even be inside your job. You might be upset that somebody who's been working at your job for less time than you have is making more money than you. Or they're getting better hours or something, and you're getting kind of passed over. That can lead to envy. It can lead to jealousy. So how does it work? How does this jealousy thing work? First, it destroys love. If you look back through the scriptures, you see a trail of destruction. Cain kills Abel. Saul tries to kill David. Herod, who is jealous that his throne was going to be taken away, has all the little children killed. The history of envy and jealousy is destruction. Envy led the brothers of Joseph to say, "Oh, here comes the dreamer. Here comes the guy who's getting all these dreams." They're mocking him. The brush of jealousy tattooed Moses with criticism by Korah and his fellow princes. "You take too much on you," they said of Moses. Jealousy had the Samaritans Sanballat envious at the prosperity of the rebuilt walls of Jerusalem. You guys know that story? Yeah.
Sanballat.
It's Hebrew, it's all the same. So, I mean, there's all sorts of stories like this in the Bible. When I was studying for this, there were stories that I had not even realized had a lot to do with envy. And I'm like, wow, this is mentioned again and again and again and again. Jealousy, when it's allowed to grow, will destroy. I mean, I've mentioned that, people have killed each other over jealousy, even in our generation. There's all sorts of sordid stories of murder and things like that. And it always starts with that jealousy thing. That's always the spark that lights the fire. Have you guys ever heard of Dante's Inferno?
The Divine Comedy.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Which really isn't that funny, so I don't understand why it's called a comedy.
It's a comedy because it's a satire.
But in Dante's story, the purgatory he pictures hell. He sees in it all the envious and jealous people. They are sitting like blind beggars toward the wall because their eyelids have been sewn shut in order to illustrate that jealousy is the blindest of all sins. The jealous person is so wrapped up in himself that he cannot lovingly see anyone else. You're focusing so much on what you don't have and what somebody else has that you want. You forget that, hey, you got some stuff that's pretty good. I think the main thing is unthankfulness. That is the heart of jealousy and envy.
And no one who's envious ever takes a second to contemplate how they would change if they got what they wanted. I mean, 99% of people who are in the top 5% are the most miserable people.
Yeah, that's very true. There's a lot of people who don't want what they've got because the more you get, the more stress is added to it. Which is why I won't take a promotion at Walmart. That's my secret. When you look at some of these stories in the scriptures, you see examples to where jealousy was like a boomerang. You guys ever thrown a boomerang?
Yep.
Throw a boomerang, it whirls around, and then comes back and smacks you in the face.
Not if you're
Unless you're good at throwing a boomerang, because then he's gonna catch it.
We had a boomerang
Sure.
for 15 years, and I got to be the one that threw it. I stole it off the wall and threw it. Never came back. Lost my course.
That's what
Seriously?
Yep. When I was like 6.
Wow, that's
I
depressing.
remember that. I think I watched you.
You guys remember the story of Haman in the book of Esther?
Yes.
Yes.
So, yeah, the king says, he asked them, so what should we do for this person? He was just asking for ideas. Well, we should, celebrate him, have this big parade and everything for him.
Time man of the year.
Yeah, make him like the kingdom person of the year, and with Mordecai, he gets these gallows and everything built for him, because he didn't like the guy. He was kind of jealous of,
The king seemed kind of naive, though. Do you think he knew about
that Haman was kind of sleazy, probably.
So he need his horse.
Yeah, it was. I don't know that story. I don't know. It's a really strange whole story. But anyway, so Haman, wants Mordecai to die because he's envious of all this stuff. And who ends up on the gallows? Himself. So his envy came back to kill him. Same thing with Daniel's accusers who wanted him thrown into the lion's den because they didn't like how God was blessing him. So they had to attack him because it was a religion. So they go and tattle on him, make this rule, tattle on him to the king, so he's thrown into the lion's den. Well, he comes out without a scratch. What happens to the people who are thrown into the den afterwards?
devoured
They
before
were,
they hit the ground.
devoured before they ever touched the ground.
Wasn't it like them and their entire family?
Yeah, several.
The Bible doesn't say.
Joseph was better off that he was sold into slavery than to deal, with the things that were happening there, because he ended up being in the position where he could save a lot of people. And it was the people who sold him into slavery that he ended up saving, right? David, he knew that he had God's blessing on his life, so he never really, was envious of what Saul was doing. He was just kind of taking care of his own thing. If you have a jealous, envious heart, you are of all men most miserable. Jealousy is like cancer. It eats away at you. It just eats and eats and eats and eats and eats. Okay, so how can you overcome jealousy? First of all, confess it as a sin. It's not a personality disorder, something you inherited. It doesn't work that way. It's a sin, an S-I-N. Jealousy is a sin. Peter says we are to put away all envy and jealousy. If you read New Testament lists of sin, jealousy and envy are almost always on the top of the list. James 3 says it's demonic. It leads to bitterness. Matthew 27 says it was the sin of envy that nailed Jesus to the cross. Pilate made the assumption that it was envy causing the Jews to deliver Jesus to him, so Christ had to die.
It was envy because the Jews didn't want their megachurches blowing up.
Yep, they didn't like that the followers were all following this prophet who they thought was probably strange, since he didn't come up in the, the prophetic schools of that day. And here's a dude who's got no letters. How does that work? One thing I think is key, if you're having issues of jealousy with another person, one of the things I think you should do is pray for that person. Pray that God's blessing will be on them. And it will humble you very quickly.
If you have biblical love, you won't have an issue with anger or jealousy.
And that's the whole gist of this. They can't coexist. One has to exist and the other can't. Another thing that I mentioned is being content with what you have is the way to get rid of envy. Thankfulness and the things that God has given you. We all have so much that why should we worry about what other people have and want what they have? We should want what we have. That's a secret of contentment, wanting what you've got. So if you're tempted to want what other people have, just remember the things that you've got. Because what we have here as Americans is better than probably 90% of the rest of the world. And I'm going to find that out here in a few weeks. There's places over there to where people don't have an education, they can't read, they don't have shoes. There's little children running around in the streets who've got nothing. Absolutely nothing. And I'm sure it'll be really convicting, when I compare the stuff that we have here. Americans waste more than what other people in the world use. You can have victory over envy. You've got to focus on God's Word and obey the commands that it says. If you're struggling with feelings of envy or jealousy or discontentment or wanting things, go to God, confess it to Him. Because as long as you're that way, you cannot love the way that the Bible says you are to love. Love is not a feeling. Love is a choice. Envy is a choice. You choose to focus on material things or worldly possessions. One of the hardest things I think is, when I see people come into Walmart and get bumped up, promoted real fast. For a while I was kind of I was tempted to be envious or jealous. And then, because some of those people were people that I trained from the first day that they started working there. And then I'm like, it kind of gave me a sense of accomplishment knowing that I was able to have an influence on somebody who was earning their way up. And it's a good feeling. Instead of being jealous, I'm happy for them, because they're realizing the things that, they want, because that's what they want, and I'm like, that's not what I want, so I try to remind myself of that. I don't want, that type of thing.
But as soon as envy crops up, then you've got Fearful the Turtle all over again.
Yeah, it's one of those things that it's just being thankful for what you've got. And it really, you know, it really, I don't know, it really kind of takes you back to the right spot when you're just happy with how things are. Any questions or comments about envy, jealousy?